Welcome to Marketing Demystified, the podcast that connects the dots for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered to transform your marketing game? You're in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jenn Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. On the heels of our last episode on the new rules of marketing and PR, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the topic of B2B public relations with our author, Michelle Garrett. Michelle's an expert at positioning clients as thought leaders and securing earned media coverage that matters. I'm so excited to talk with her today. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen.
Absolutely. This is such an interesting topic. I think, a lot of companies kind of struggle with how to navigate PR. And so having you as an expert on today, I'm really excited to dig in.
Well, it's always fun for me to talk about it for sure. And I'm a big fan of David Meerman Scott and watch that episode. So, this is fun to be following in his footsteps. So
Absolutely. So everybody go back if you missed last week's episode with David Meerman Scott. We talked about the new rules of marketing and PR, and we really did focus quite a bit on marketing. So let's dive into a little bit of PR stuff. Yeah. So you talk a lot about getting real results from B2B PR. What are real results for PR?
Yes, well, it's I find that a lot of times people want to equate it to, backlinks or how many pitches went out that month. And I feel like it's about more than that. It's really about a consistent, sustained effort, staying out there in front of your audience and really continually doing things beyond product launches, because you're only going to have one of those every so often to stay in front of your audience and really using different vehicles or tactics, approaches to get in front of them. So I feel like there's a lot more to it than some people maybe think.
Yeah, for sure. And, even just you mentioning like beyond product launches, I think I always wonder, like, how much does the media care about your product launch, depending on what it is, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's a lot of stuff that, feels like, hey, we should do a press release about this, but actually, does anybody care about what you're releasing, right? Like, what do you think are the things that actually are newsworthy?
Well, I think that press releases do have a role to play. And again, I focus specifically on B2B PR these days. I've done all types of PR over the years, but that's really where I am focusing my efforts because I think those companies have a lot to say. They do have products that you can write press releases about, but beyond that, they have thought leadership. They have real thought leaders in manufacturing, for example. Some of those companies are 50, 75 years old, and the leadership there actually knows what they're talking about and has, a lot to share. We can work with them on contributed articles. Sometimes they could be ghost written if the executives don't have time, which most of them don't. Let's be honest, they're busy. We can talk about customer stories. They have some very interesting and cool customers to highlight. Of course, visuals play a huge role in this today in PR because the more visuals, the better. High quality visuals, they love. Journalists love photos. They love video. If you can include that with your pitches, that can really help you make some headway as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point. They're like the way that I just had this conversation earlier in the week, the way that we consume content has really shifted, right? Mm-hmm. Just in terms of like, having a phone in your hand that has content on it that you're looking at 30-second, 15-second clips of, or are like on-demand access to streaming content and things like that. Like the things like news, we consume much differently than we did a long time ago as well. So
Mhm.
making sure that you're providing the type of content that the news is going to be able to actually use. Like it's not
Right.
something that's going to get, well, I shouldn't say it's never something that's going to get printed in a newspaper, but it's not only that anymore. Like, is
Mhm.
that why do you think like the images and the videos are so important, or is there more to it?
Well, I mean, I've done some, kind of digging into this a little bit for presentations that I give and blog posts and things. And it's true that articles with visuals get a much higher percentage of viewers and readers. And some people, that will draw their eye. The picture will draw their eye, then they might actually read the story. And with journalists, I think they want as many people to view their content as possible. So it's a win for the journalist, it's a win for the client. And for example, in B2B, we're always pitching trade publications and they want to see visuals. If you can get them in your customer's facility, for example, that's really great. And I know not all, we're not always able to do that. Some won't allow that for legal reasons and so forth. But if you can do it, that is really powerful. And it can help your pitch to stand out if they're getting, pitched all day and most of them don't include high quality visuals and yours does, that can actually kind of sway them in your favor sometimes. Editors have said that to me before.
For sure. Yeah. What about things like infographics, right? Like we probably have a lot of
Mhm,
people listening today on the research side, on the insight side, like data and analytics, and
mhm,
having a sort of infographic to go along with your story,
mhm.
how important is something like that?
I think it's great to have research and data to pitch and share, and if you can visualize that with your infographics and charts and graphs and so forth, I think that's really, also of interest to journalists, especially if it's, um, unique research that you have done on a topic that maybe nobody's dug into. You can't always do that either. I know that everybody can afford to conduct their own original research, for example, but if you can, I think that's another way to get stories and news in front of journalists beyond just your average product announcement.
Yeah, for sure. The one thing that I think is, because again, a lot of our audience here is in the insight space or customer experience or doing market research regularly.
Mhm,
So we do have a lot to share in terms of data, which is such a benefit to be able to include that in press. But I guess, what do you recommend in terms of like the type of content? If you have a PR strategy, like
mhm.
what percentage of your content should be your company story, your thought leadership, the data that you're sharing, or product releases? Like, do you have a recommended, like, how do you get the full story into the press versus just like always that one lane of like we're always presenting data or we're always talking about a product?
I think it's great if you can have kind of a robust strategy and plan. And of course, this is a great time of year to be planning for next year and
Yeah.
look at, first of all, fill in, everything that you know is coming up. If you're going to a trade show, if you do have a product or solution to announce, put all those things on the calendar and then look at the gaps. What can you use to fill in the gaps? Again, things like customer stories, things like thought leadership, things like contributed articles, things like original research. Those could all be probably slotted in, to fill in the gaps. I don't think a lot of those are terribly, seasonal or time sensitive. They're more evergreen.
Mm.
And then you could just kind of, see how that goes for you, and of course, you could be planning and preparing to stay out there, year round instead of just having like, well, we do this big trade show every spring, or we announce this product and we're gonna announce it in the fall. You could look at how to stay out there, just throughout the year in front of your audience.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I mean, that's a great tip even beyond PR. It's a great social media tip or a great campaign tip. Like you probably have things that are time bound that you're planning,
Mhm.
that need to happen at a specific time. And so then filling the gaps with that evergreen content is such a great way to make sure you're maintaining that drumbeat.
Yes, and it does take planning and
Yeah.
thought and research, and you have to know where your audience is spending time. And PR, it's the same, for PR teams as it would be for any other team in marketing. I think, we all have to be doing more research and just being more thoughtful. And, how are we spending our time and resources? And hopefully we're making headway on reaching the people that we want to reach and being in front of them when they need us, because I think that's the other thing, is that people forget they're just going to do a one-off PR campaign because they do have a product or something, like, well, that didn't get us very far, and then they just move on, instead of kind of looking at it as something that you have to consistently do over time.
Yeah, that's so hard. I mean, anything that is, requires to be consistent and do it over time often
Mhm,
gets abandoned before it
mhm,
is really ready to perform. What are some of those like early indications that that it's working, that you should
mhm.
continue to invest your time and resource into it? Like, how do you know it's working?
Well, first of all, when somebody asks me how long does it take for PR to work, my answer, because I get asked this so often, I finally came up with an answer, and I would say, 3 to 6 months if you're working with someone new, for example, a new agency or consultant, or even, an in-house, a new hire or something. Give them a little time to get ramped up. Especially if you've never done any PR or haven't done it in a while or haven't done it consistently. Because I think sometimes clients think, well, they're miracle workers and we can just, expect results right out of the gate. I mean, sometimes that can happen, but I just wouldn't set the expectation for that, because that can be very, it can be hard to overcome if the client becomes disappointed. So I think if we're looking at, kind of building momentum, give us a little time to kind of ramp up, and then you should be seeing some results. If you're doing an earned media effort, for example, I would say 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you do have to be consistent and commit to something before don't just get one article, put out one press release and nobody picks it up and say PR doesn't work. That's not really a good approach. But like, what are some of those things that you would look at to say, hey, we are gaining some traction
Mhm.
in a particular area? What are some of the like guideposts for people to say, hey, stick with it? There is something that's working here.
Well, I know this is not a scientific way to measure it, but one of my clients, the CEO, will walk into a trade show or an event, an industry event, for example, and people will come up to him and say, "Hey, we've seen you everywhere." And so to him, that is a measurement. It's created a buzz in the industry. And so they are constantly out there in front of their audience and their industry, competitors and partners and things, and people notice. So again, that's not necessarily a scientific measurement, and there are things you can measure. You can look and see, if your views are going up. I mean, you can look at backlinks. I don't love that measurement. And I would definitely not say that sending out more pitches is a way to measure the effectiveness, because you could send out thousands of pitches and some people do at random, called spray and pray in the PR world, and that does not get them anywhere. So I think being very thoughtful, focusing on maybe 15 or so publications in your space, would be a better way, and kind of really pursuing that very diligently and consistently is a much better way to achieve coverage, get traction, than just kind of throwing anything out there to anyone and everyone. That just doesn't work very well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's a good strategy too, to sort of have those target publications. And really, it's like, you're checking off the list. If these editors are interested in what you're talking about,
Mhm.
that's an indication that you're saying the right things, that,
Yeah.
they think the audience is going to be interested in it. So that's validating. I'm so curious. You say, you don't love the backlink measurement. Tell me more about that. What don't you like about that as a metric?
Well, I think what's happened is we have people that are link builders, and, unfortunately, they are pitching journalists, and they're not doing. I mean, like I say, they don't all do this, but a lot of them are not very thoughtful or careful about how they're doing it. So they're just filling up their mailboxes with spammy pitches that have nothing to do with what the journalist is covering. And so then it just makes it harder for those of us in PR to kind of get their attention because they kind of throw everything out. They're like, well, this is all terrible. Our inbox is full of stuff that's not relevant. And they might miss something that actually is relevant unless they know you and they know what you send them. And that's where relationships come in. Again, I don't say, that we live and die by our relationships in PR. Some would say that we do. I do not believe that. I believe if you have a good story, you pitch it to the right journalist, you time it right, those things are always more important than any of the other things that get talked about.
Yeah, that's such a great little formula. I'm like furiously jotting it down. Like good story, right journalist at the right time. Like that is the formula, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it doesn't necessarily matter as much the relationship, although it certainly helps.
It cannot hurt anything, but I also don't love it when you go into a meeting with somebody, a prospective client, and they ask, like, who do you know?
Mm,
I don't think that's necessarily the best question to ask. I would be more curious to know, like, what industries do you have experience in? And that might be a little bit more important to know than the specific people within a publication. Because let's be honest, journalists are being laid off. They're also choosing to leave. Changes happen all the time. I think if you're too tied to these relationships, that could potentially hurt you in the longer run because, again, we just know that the media landscape is changing, right before our eyes, and it has been over the past few years. And I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon.
yeah. Oh my gosh, totally. It's definitely
Unfortunately.
an interesting time.
Yeah, I know it's really unfortunate, but I don't it's just reality, so.
For sure. So I'm curious, like, I have now a series of questions based on what you've just shared. But really, like you mentioned earlier, a PR team internally, or what if you don't have a PR team?
Mhm,
Like, who should own PR in a
mhm.
business?
Yeah.
And how does that look? How should you structure that if you're kind of starting from the ground up?
That's a great question. Of course, it usually sits under marketing, and I don't think that that's necessarily wrong, although we see companies now with chief communications officers, and I think PR is part of communications. And as we see executives put their foot in their mouth, almost daily again, I think that PR needs to have a pretty close tie and connection to the C-suite. And so I don't know if marketing always has that, if they have a CMO, but of course those tenures are pretty short too.
Mhm.
So I just feel like, it's all kind of shifting, and it'll be interesting to see where it lands. I feel like PR is maybe getting a little bit more of a voice now because the execs are seeing the importance of, knowing what to say and when to say it and what not to say. Maybe just being quiet sometimes is better, So, but I don't think it's wrong that PR necessarily sits with marketing. I do not like the silos. I feel like, PR's kind of, yeah, they're going to go off and write a press release. That's what PR does. That's not necessarily the right view of your PR team. I would say content, social, PR need to be pretty closely working together and not in silos. And you mentioned, smaller marketing teams, and I usually work with smaller companies. I call that 500 employees or less. Those are often my clients. They might have a one-person marketing team.
Mhm.
And so then they would bring in somebody, maybe an agency's overkill. They might bring in somebody like a consultant to help them with their PR and kind of keep a program going because they just don't have the bandwidth.
Oh, that's interesting. So, there's kind of a journey, I guess, of like, a consultant, an agency, or in-house, or, maybe a combination. I mean, what are some guidelines, I guess, in terms of like, if I don't have any PR resources,
Mhm.
where do I start? Do I hire somebody? Do I get a consultant? Do I look for an agency? The answer might be it depends, right? But
Isn't it always it depends?
yeah, yeah,
It's
totally.
always it depends. However, One thing I wouldn't do is spend a lot of money on tools right out of the gate, like wire services and media databases, unless you have somebody who knows how to use that technology, or unless you're Apple and you have an endless amount of money to throw at this. I think that a lot of times companies will just buy into technology solutions and they'll be like, okay, well, it's taken care of. And then when I start working with them, they don't even know the password to get in the media database, and it's thousands of dollars a year. They could have paid somebody to come in and do some pitching for them. And instead of just releasing a press release on a wire and saying, okay, nobody wrote about it, you have to pitch it, and you have to have somebody that knows what to do and how to do that. And if you don't have time or the knowledge, as to how to do that, that's probably, where you should start spending money. And then, of course you could ramp up. I think a lot of times agencies can be overkill, especially for smaller companies with a smaller budget. There are other resources out there to consider besides an agency if you don't have someone in-house to take care of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned too, like, don't ask somebody who they know, ask them about the industry. Like, what other, like, I guess whether I'm hiring somebody for my
Mhm,
internal team or I'm interviewing an agency or a consultant, what other
mhm.
questions would you recommend asking to make sure you get the right fit?
Well, I would ask to see some of their writing. I would
Mm.
ask to see some writing samples, and I mean, it shouldn't be written by AI. I mean, let's be, again, honest here. Everybody wants to use AI for everything. I mean, and that, go for it, whatever works for you. I just think you have to be careful, especially when you want to sound, you want your unique point of view out there. If you're doing thought leadership, if you're, say, a journalist sends you questions to answer for a story, you do not want to feed those into AI and then send back the answers. And I mean, I wouldn't do it at all, but especially if you didn't review what the what answers came back from AI, you should definitely be reviewing that. And you want it to sound unique. You don't want it to sound like everyone else, or no one's ever going to call you to be quoted in an article again. So I feel like I would be looking at writing skills. I would be looking at critical thinking. How do they think? What do they, you know, do they just see it as kind of a one-off? We just write press releases, or are they looking at a bigger, more strategic view of how to position your company, how to get your brand visibility, how to build your reputation, how to protect it, all those things. Crisis communications, that's another thing. What would you do, if XYZ happened in our industry? I work with food processor manufacturing companies. There's a lot of, companies in the news right now for various food safety issues. So, we have to be kind of ready to talk about, whatever the trends and hot topics are. And your PR person needs to know, be able to be aware of that and be a quick study and get up to speed and kind of help counsel and coach you a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, those are some great tips. Appreciate that. And then tell me, like, what what would you recommend in terms of, like, you want to pitch yourself? There's a lot of, I don't know if I call them DIY tools, but there's databases out there where journalists are asking for quotes and asking for stories. And
Mhm,
what recommendations would you have for somebody who's maybe not a PR pro and
mhm,
wants to pitch themselves? Maybe
yeah,
you're a one man shop or something,
mhm.
and you want to use those databases. What would you recommend?
Well, there are, things like it used to be called Haro by Peter Shankman. It's Source of Sources now, I believe, is the latest, name of his. He kind of relaunched it, basically.
Yeah.
That's one that I would trust because Peter's been around a long time. He's not gonna do anything that's gonna put off journalists. I know Quoted is another one, but it's a little bit, I think it's a little expensive. So again, if you're on a budget, I would say don't go crazy spending money on things right away. Maybe it would be more important to bring somebody in on the talent side who knew how to pitch and place stories and earn media articles and contributed articles and so forth. So
Okay. Yeah, that's so interesting. All right. Those are great tips. Um, Anything else to share with us today?
well, I just say, don't discount PR. Make sure as you plan for the new year and beyond that you are factoring PR into your marketing plans because it can really help and you can work together. That's the other thing. I feel like you can leverage. I just spoke at Content Marketing World last week about how to work with your content team and how sometimes content can take the lead, sometimes PR can take the lead, but you can definitely work together, collaborate together, and that way everyone comes out a winner, everyone is happy, and you get more out of what you're producing.
Yeah, for sure. That's that rising tide, right? If everybody's working in the same direction,
Yeah.
everybody's more successful. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today, your expertise. I love it. We don't talk about PR a lot on this show, so I hope everybody got a lot out of it. But thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, Jenn.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in today. I'm going to be back with another episode soon.